you know, and then wait more. So you give your mind permission to do that, and you make it safe, and you tell your conscious mind to shut up. And there are different tricks. Sometimes it's easier for us to do it. Sounds like you've got a great relationship with yourself, and you can do that. But some people find it hard to do it. And so you can do things like you set a timer. And Virginia Woolf used to do this. She'd just make herself write. She wouldn't let her hands stop, and she wouldn't reread what she wrote for a set period of time. And then she wouldn't go back and reread what she'd written for a couple of days. So she would give herself that sort of in love, wow, this feels fabulous kind of period of time. And then she'd go back and she would use her conscious mind, her writer's mind, to say, oh, that's a good image. That's an interesting idea. And wow, that's really stupid. That sentence didn't go anywhere, and it doesn't really matter. She's just looking for the good stuff that came out. When you go back over a draft, you're looking for those places of provisional order. Wait, I got onto something here. And then you're going to do a revision. A revision is different than editing. So you don't edit until you are putting the finishing touches on. You guys work in different arts traditions, and I'm, pretty limited to being a writer. So I don't know what the equivalent is, but I know there are like things you do when a painting is finished, for example, that you don't do beforehand. And editing is like that with writing. It's the final finishing touches when all the substantial work is done. And you're fixing punctuation, you're making little choices. Those choices might matter, but they don't change the whole shape of the thing. They don't reconceive it. But revision means re-seeing. It is revision. And so you expect that as part of the process. In fact, if you think about it as vision, you kind of want it, right? It's a good thing. So you read the stuff you wrote, and you laugh at the parts that were just like, wow, why did I spend 5 pages doing that? And you're not in love with it anymore, so you don't make the mistake of, well, I have to somehow fit everything in here, even though everything doesn't fit in because I didn't know what I was talking about, right? That's the in-love stage. You're not in love anymore, you just say, yeah, let's get rid of that. And you find the parts where you feel like you're onto something, and then you do a whole other version. And sometimes that whole other version has not one sentence in common with the first draft, and sometimes it has other chunks, because sometimes you read that first draft and what you come out with is a sense of the shape of where you want to go, but you didn't have that when you wrote it, so nothing that you wrote actually ends up fitting there. But when you start, you are in a completely different place than you were before. And you know that you're going to do this as often as it takes. And again, this is really a lot like the therapeutic process. You don't say to the client, okay, right now, I want you to tell me what went wrong with your mother. Get it right the first time. Because we are not coming back to this subject. Yeah, right? Yes. Unless you are independently wealthy, I don't recommend practice this way. So, right? You know that in fact, they're going to keep revising that. They're going to keep coming back to it, and you're literally going to re-see it every time they tell it. They're going to see it a little bit differently. So the writing process is a lot like that also. And again, you're going to have faith that at a certain, first the changes will be huge, and you might get rid of everything. But after you do it a couple of times, you really start knowing what you're doing. And then your conscious mind and the part that is generating material start working together. And you can start to fulfill. So you can say, okay, this is part 1, and I see what I need to do here, and I left this out. And part 2 I don't know about yet. I better start again. I'm just going to write. I have one sentence that I think is an idea. I'll put that at the top of the page, and I'll just see what happens. And you do the revision process again. So if you give yourself enough time, like my comp students don't realize that enough time is not the hours between 2 and 4 a.m. That's not giving yourself enough time for revision. That I get rough drafts. But if you give yourself enough time for this, not only does the writing get really interesting, but you learn an enormous amount from the choices that you're making. What works and what doesn't work. And I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Me? Erica.
Erica. So, and Erica, like Erica, you'll be able to make choices about, so how much time do I need to spend on this part? And sometimes you get things in enough shape, they're not done, you're not ready to edit, you're not putting the finishing touches on. You say, I now know enough about this part that I can start on the next part. And anxieties, like what you're worrying about, sometimes that's a guide to what you need to do. Like if you're too worried about what is going to happen with that second part of the writing assignment, you don't want to spend years perfecting the first part. And in fact, even if the first part's pretty good, you're going to keep learning from doing the later parts. So you don't want to get too invested in the first part and make it perfect, because you may end up revising it and seeing it differently as you see it as part of a larger and larger whole. So part of what you're doing is learning about yourself as a writer, what works and what doesn't. And Erica obviously knows some things about herself as a writer, but she didn't know that she was normal and healthy. And now she does. This was a guilty little secret she had, but she shared it with us and we feel better. So somebody else's writing process. Somebody who wasn't able to get anywhere, couldn't write anything. Tell me about that. What happened when you were reading these questions?
Well, I had a really hard time with the part where it said bring copies to share with everyone, because and I'm a visual artist, so I felt very comfortable doing the visual art expression of, and really dove into that part of it, but was having a hard time, because I use a lot of words in my visual art, and really like the use of words, but was having a hard time figuring out how to tell the story of what happened so that an audience would understand, but not feeling like I was getting, because for me that starts sounding trite and corny and kind of trivializing something really powerful that happened to me or is part of my process versus the poetry of using the words that I'm feeling. So that was the piece that really gave me kind of writer's block from going from the words on my visual art to actually writing a story about it.
There was, I don't know if you guys know Robert Haas, but he was Poet Laureate and he's won all these prizes. He lives in Berkeley. He's very Berkeley, very relaxed. And one of the things he said, when I was a young writer, I heard a breath lecture, and he said something that really pissed me off. He said, poets create their own audiences. And I thought, yeah, you can say that because you've won the Pulitzer Prize. You created your own audience and gave you the Pulitzer Prize. That's not working for me. But later I realized that actually part of the writing process was my imagination of who I was writing to. And it was a part that I wasn't even aware of. And I was having a terrible time, for years I was having a terrible time writing poems because I didn't realize that I was trying to write poems that my parents would understand. And my parents have nothing to do with poetry. I mean, there isn't even, they can use that word, but it was not a part of their existence. It had no meaning. So I was trying to do something impossible because I had this sort of childhood fantasy and wish that I would make it intelligible for them. And I was imagining an audience that was making it impossible for me to do the work that I needed to do. So in academia or other kinds of writing performances, I think this is generally true with creativity, is you need to partly imagine your audience. And sometimes you get help. For example, Shoshana has given you an assignment that helps you imagine her as an audience.
And Danielle.
And so they are partly your audience. And sometimes you don't know enough about them. Right? So a lot of us spend a lot of time, I don't know if you ever did the 9 dots exercise where you have to connect 9. It's a grid of 9 dots, and you have to connect them without lifting your pencil from the paper. You can only do it by going outside the grid. And people can't do that because they imagine an extra rule. So a lot of times, particularly in academia, we imagine our audiences creating a series of unfair conditions. Right? Of course, this won't be good enough. It's got to be personal, but it's got to be academic. Right? Well, is this really academic? Well, probably not to her. You don't even know what kind of dialogue this is sometimes. So sometimes it's if you're finding yourself blocked that way, you might want to do a creative exercise if you're a visual artist. Why don't you draw a picture of the person you think you're writing to? What do they look like? What's the expression on their face? What don't you know about them? What are the blanks? I would let that part talk, because I'm a writer. I would say, okay, talk to me. What do you want from me? How can I make you happy? And often the answer is, I can't make you happy, and that means I've imagined the wrong audience. And you know that to the extent that the people you're writing to are your professors, you know actually that that's not true about them. And you know that they are less concerned about you making them happy, although I'm sure that they would love a little bit more happiness in their life from you. But then they are about you growing into the best therapist that you can grow into. And so if you're imagining them in a way, or if you don't know something about them, so you're filling in the blanks with your anxieties, that is disabling you and keeping you from writing, either having an imaginary dialogue with them where you put them in place and you turn them into a supportive audience. I don't know, imagine in their underwear people do this, I don't know. I've never done that, that's scary to me. Don't do it to me. But you know, that's one way that people sort of puncture that way that we give too much authority to these critical fantasy figures. Or actually talking to them because they're like here. And my students often, it never occurs to them that if they're imagining me sneering and cutting their work to shreds, that they might want to ask me about that. Like, is it really true that I'm just too stupid to write a paper that you'll like? And I'm happy to have that conversation with them. I would prefer not to be a vicious cartoon that disables them. And I really want them to know that they're not alone. I mean, that's the advantage of being in school. There's a lot of growing that we have to do as adults in particular, that we just kind of have to do alone. But when you're in school, you don't. So when you're having any kinds of difficulty doing an assignment or something you need to grow, then you need to change the rules of the game that you've been imagining and enable yourself. So if you were my student, I'd say, oh yeah, let's talk about this. Show me what you got. And find out what a real life reader thinks is working and isn't working. And the truth is that sometimes there are forms of discourse that we have to adjust ourselves to. But again, that's kind of the miracle of revision. So I would say to you, get it out just the way you want. And then start showing it to people you trust and asking them questions. And I always tell my students, make me a better teacher by telling me the kinds of responses you'd like from me. And at first they don't know enough about themselves to do that. But by the end, they'll say things like, you know what, I know that that part doesn't make any sense. Please don't talk to me about it. I'm still working on it. But this part, I want to know if this makes sense to you. And so that they feel, instead of feeling disabled, they feel like they're the writer, they're in charge, and they're just using me to help them bring their work into its fullest expression. So I think that is a great problem to have because it's so widespread. All right, so somebody else. Yes.
Well, I read the exercises when they were first handed to me, and I went, no, oh no, like I do not have time for this. No, oh no, I can't do this. Like, whoa, it was like, and so I thought about it, but I didn't do them, and I think actually a lot of the sort of those three elements that you were talking about are really helpful for someone like me who's going, ooh, I don't have time to like sit down and give myself space to just write creatively, because I think that these exercises are really fantastic ways of, like you said, making it low stakes. And so maybe if you could give a little bit of advice for people like me who need to sort of flex that muscle a little bit.
That's a great question. And I also want to fess up. So you didn't say this, but my fantasy is that you realized your life was too short to do these exercises when you hit the word paradigmatic. So Shoshana gave me a writing exercise. She said, come up with writing exercises. And my life was really crowded, so I'm like, okay, I got to come up with writing exercises. And I like the word paradigmatic because it makes me sound professional and smart. And I had this guilty feeling because what makes me feel professional and smart doesn't actually necessarily do what a writing exercise assignment should do, which is enable students and inspire students to write. So the word paradigmatic does the opposite of what I would like to do as a writing teacher.
Can I actually confess something
Yeah.
to you? I went, oh, you know, okay, paradigmatic. And like, I do know what that means, right? But I was trying to think about how could I like actually connect that to like a real life story, right? And so I actually went on Google and like looked up the word paradigmatic to see if I could sort of like get some feelings about that and like how that...
Well, see, so that was wonderful that you did that. It was terrible that you had to.
No.
But it was, you know, thank God, you know, Google is out there to give people something to do with bad writing science. But the, you know, when I reread that, I was like, wow, that is scary. What the heck would that mean if I had to do this? Well, I don't. Right? So I needed to revise. So, okay, we've got no secrets from each other. I needed to revise, and I needed to think about my audience, and I had confused two audiences. Shoshana, a fellow professional, was hiring me to do a job, and for whom the word paradigmatic would, you know, probably show her that she was getting what she's paying for. And the actual people that I was writing to were students who were not experienced writers, right? This is a beginning writing assignment in an introductory class. And so using a word that says, you are probably not smart enough to ever do this, is a terrible idea. So I had not the wrong audience, I just had these sort of overlapping audiences. And because I didn't do revision, I didn't separate that out, I didn't sort it out. And if I had, I would have changed the wording. I might have changed the assignment, but I edited it. And it had typos, and there were words missing and stuff like that, so there probably still are, but I did the best I could. But I didn't revise it. I didn't look at it again with fresh eyes and think about, so really, okay, what am I trying to stimulate here? Right? What am I trying to give people? And are my words going to get in the way, or are they going to help you do the work that you need to do? So I'm really sorry about that.
Oh, come on. That's not the point, you know. It's like, and honestly, it wasn't even about like, am I not smart enough? It was like, I don't know, like, my life is pretty boring, you know? It was like...
Oh, right. So, yeah, mine too, but I guess maybe not anymore. But the interesting thing about me used to be that I commuted from Massachusetts to New York. Now we talk about other things at cocktail parties. But paradigmatic, you know, that is like, the reason that that's a really bad idea is because if you think about it in terms of what I just said, you can only figure out what's paradigmatic by doing a whole lot of other thinking. So you said, could you please turn that into a process that somebody could do without knowing the answer from the beginning? And the answer would be something like listing. It would say, well, I don't know what's paradigmatic. Let me just think about a list of, here's a list. Incident, anecdote, family story, personal or cultural ritual. Let's leave out other aspect for the moment. That's a list of stuff. It's always a good idea to do the kind of writing that appeals to you when you can. Sometimes you have to fill out tax forms or something, but when you have a choice, choose what's interesting. So if you look at that and you say, I love anecdotes, make a list of anecdotes. Don't judge them. Don't look for the paradigmatic anecdotes. That's why that should have come at the end. Just make a whole list of anecdotes that interest you or appeal to you enough to put them on your list. Just name them. Don't put them in order. Then, maybe you turn that list of fragments into sentences. Okay, you just said the blue paint time, right? And you know that that means the time your sister poured a can of blue paint over your head. Right? And so you say, yeah, you know what, I'm interested enough in that, so you order your list just in terms of what's most interesting and least interesting. And you know what? If you can afford to, ignore the least interesting. Right? Don't worry about it. Maybe the most interesting thing is the first thing, maybe it's the last thing, maybe it's stuck in the middle, so you order your list to see what most interests you, and then you write those things out as complete sentences. And then maybe you start thinking about them, and you think, you know what, that's one that I want to think more about. Like if you were Erica, you'd say, you know, that would be a good digression. Like if I was writing the paper I had to write, that would be a side road I'd really like to go on. So maybe that's worth writing out as a page. Let's see what's in that anecdote. What do I know about it? What do I remember about it? Maybe you don't even want to write at that point, and you just want to remember. One of my difficulties, because I was so disconnected from my body, is remembering is really hard for me. It's kind of a pleasure and kind of very difficult. I don't remember vivid detail. I don't visualize well at all. But if I force myself to do it, then sometimes these things open up. So if you try to do that, and it does open up, that's a sign you're onto something here. I don't know if it's paradigmatic, but it's something that is vivid, it's rich, it's growing larger the more you put into it. And if the opposite thing happens, if you're like, yeah, you know, I can't remember much about that. Like one sentence is about it. She poured blue paint over my head. I don't know what happened. I hope mom really hit her. But I don't know what happened. Then that's obviously not going to be a good incident for you to work on. So this is all really low stakes stuff because it's all just do what you most feel like doing. And I have a lot of faith in the imagination and in the unconscious, in really creativity, all the stuff that creativity comes from. So I think that the stuff that interests us most, even when we don't know why it interests us, is often, not always, sometimes Angry Birds is not a paradigmatic anecdote, but it's often the direction that we need to go in. That by playing that way, we often get to the good stuff. The academic discourse part is forcing us to think about it more rigorously than is necessarily fun. There is a kind of fun from academic thinking, but you know, when you're an artist, there's one kind of rigor, and you say, well, you know, it doesn't really matter. Like if I'm a writer, I say, it doesn't matter what actually happened. I've got enough, and now I'm just going to make it what it needs to be to fit into this story or poem. But if you're an academic, you say, okay, let me think about it from this side. Let me think about it from that side. How does this relate to the term blah, blah, blah? How does it define this pattern, right? So you kind of put yourself through these other abstracting paces. But the beginning of it should be this kind of creative, let's make lists and let's find the stuff that seems cool to us. And then you notice that I say paradigmatic, which is a disabling word, and then later I say that represents or embodies. And those are somewhat less scary. First of all, or is always less scary. I don't know about you, but when I see or, I'm like, oh, thank God. You know? I get to pick the one that is easiest. And I strongly recommend picking the one that's easiest. Like the students in my school, they always try to do things the hardest way. They feel it's morally good. And I'm like, no. You know, writing is hard, thinking is hard, being a human being is hard. So if you have a choice and one way seems easier or more fun to you, duh. You know, I'm not saying play hooky, but if you're doing what you have to do and you can do it in a way that enables you, then go that way. It's just like when you're working with somebody else who's come to you. If they're blocked, but you can think of another way that will enable them to turn anxiety into laughter and to get outside themselves and do work. Sure, you can sadistically insist that they do it the hard way, but you might just want to offer them the alternative and do it the other way. If you get to where you want to go, do it the easy way. Because life is really hard enough. So then, it's like represents or embodies. Then you start saying to this anecdote. You start asking it questions. Talk to me, anecdote. Right? You were interesting. I've thought a lot about you. What are you telling? Do you represent something? About my sociocultural identity, and the anecdote says, what do you mean by sociocultural? And you either do or don't know what that means. So if you don't know what a teacher's assignment means, you should really ask the teacher. Or you can do what I did when I was a student, and I would just take it as a free shot. Like, I don't know what you mean, so I'm just going to make up the meaning that suits me. And I said, hey, I'm a poet. That's okay. I don't know how that plays around here. I encourage my students to ask. And sometimes when they ask, sometimes I don't know. And sometimes I realize that I need to explain to everybody. And sometimes I really learn something, like, what do I mean by sociocultural? It does mean something to me, but I've never unpacked it. So what am I looking for here? But if you're alone, you're on a desert island, you can't talk to your teachers, you can't do anything, you want to go forward, you don't want to be blocked, delete it. You know, and represents or embodies an aspect of your identity. So that's suddenly less scary. And when I give writing exercises, I always tell my students, and I should have told you guys that, don't let my assignment get in the way of doing great writing. Right? So don't come in and say, I could have written this really great poem, but instead I did this stupid assignment that you gave me, because the great poem I wanted to write didn't actually fit the terms of your assignment. So, that was a mistake. I want to just provoke you to do the work that needs to be done to you. And maybe it's work that takes you into, you're like, wow, I don't know if you represent my identity or not. I don't know what aspect it is, but there's something about you, that anecdote, that is really like blowing my mind here. I want to think about you more and more. I want to paint you. I want to dance you. I would trust that, right? So the paradigmatic and represents, all of that is later reflection and intellectualization. That it's part of the revision process. When you've got it all out there and you look at it and you say, so what does it mean? And again, in a better structured assignment, I would have broken it down into those parts and said, play, find the parts that draw you, develop them, and then start reflecting on it and see what you can make out of it. Does that feel like the kind of, yeah, I don't know about your teachers, but I need my students to talk to me to make me a better teacher, because I think most teachers wish we were the perfect teacher for every single one of our students. But it's pretty hard to know people that intimately. So we need you to talk to us. We need you to ask questions. We need you to tell us when you're frustrated. We need you not to blame yourselves if something is hard. Because that gives us an opportunity to be the best possible teachers we can be for you. I know time is running short here. Does anybody have something that they'd like that they wrote that they'd like us to look at? And another thing I was worried about in my non-revision of the writing assignment was just what you said, like the spring copies. And I thought, I don't really know you guys, so I don't know if you feel safe to do that. And when you get, part of being a writer is you need to figure out when to get feedback. When is the right time to hear from somebody? And it happens in therapy too. Sometimes therapists just need to shut up and listen, and sometimes they need to witness back and reflect. But when you're a writer or a creative artist, you need to call that shot for yourself. So when I'm in love with whatever I just wrote, I have learned it is a bad time to call in somebody else as a witness. Because somehow they just never love it the right way. They never love it as much as I do. And so I don't want to hear from them. But at different points in my process, I realize I just can't do it. I can't know what choices I'm making anymore. I need to hear somebody who is not me respond to what I've done here, or I'm completely lost. And so then I take the risk, and it is a risk, because frankly, I still just want them to say I love it. And I'm pretty sure they won't. And it's not even useful if they do, but I still wish they would. But I am strong enough and safe enough and detached enough from it that I can call them in. So you need to get to know that aspect of yourself as a writer also. And again, if you leave enough time in your writing process, you can give yourself that safety. And if you don't, then you are driving without seatbelts and airbags, because you write something, hand it into your teacher, you get a nasty comment, this looks like you wrote it last night. Yeah. And everybody feels bad. Your teacher is really unhappy, you're unhappy, and part of it is you do your best work, but part of it is just you weren't ready to show this to anybody. It was real writing, it was part of your process, but it just wasn't ready to go out into the world yet. So thinking about how and when to bring in your readers and how to instruct them to be good people for you. Respond to this, don't tell me about that. Only answer this question. Say what images arise when I read this. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that you can construct your reader to get what you need out of them. Just out of curiosity, yeah, please. No, please.
So, I mean, each of us is a multiplicity of things, and for me in the writing exercise, it's this super abundance of dizzying constellations of like what to choose, and I'm starry-eyed at all of these parts of me and everyone else, and for me, if this is just one suggestion for how we use our time, I'd love to hear from my fellow and other cohort members about whether it's one, and whether it's a little list, it's one thing that they want to share, a paragraph. I would love to feel inspired and also connected to the stuff that's going on and hear from everyone, just to, and to have your comments guiding our sharing.
Yeah, and you know what? It doesn't have to be paradigmatic or linear or dumb. But if you feel like it's safe for you, yeah, it's actually just great to see how many different ways there are to do something.
Could we do it popcorn style, so whoever wants to
Totally,
share it?
yeah. And we don't have to hand it around because that disables your critical audience. If people can look at things and, you know what, that's not the right word. But if they're just hearing it out loud, it goes by too fast for them to be critical that way. So, yeah, just read anybody who wants to, some part of what you wrote about this. Did you want to pop first? You can say no.
I think my answer is no.
Are we reading just a snippet of it? Like, what do we do?
I think given the amount of time, read,
Pick a section.
it can be as small as a sentence and as large as a coherent section. It's like maybe a page, something like that. That way we'll be able to absorb it. Yes.
I've been really inspired by my cohorts with their poetry, and so I tried to do something a little out of my box and mimic their styles. And so I wrote a poem about a family vacation, and it's pretty short, but here's my notes. Okay, so repetition and history, repetition and family, destination Jersey. Hotel, beach, bad food, rinse and repeat. I see my family legacy in this funnel cake, and in the crest of that wave, and in my father's smile. This place is like a bad sunburn. As long as aloe is beside me, I will go to see my father remember his childhood.
So what do you guys notice about that? Like, I noticed that it starts one way and it ends in a really different place.
I had like kind of like an enlightenment or realization like 2/3 of the way through about like, I don't know, like I was writing about I tried to find something paradigmatic, so I picked something that we all have done before, like go on a family vacation. And then as I was writing, I was like, why the hell did we go to this weird place? You know, like what's the point of it? So I was thinking about my family, and then it's like, oh, we've been doing that for generations. It's repetitive. It's like what we're just used to, and we never stray from that path of like doing the same activities every single time we go, which I thought was annoying, but then it has a purpose. It has like a purpose of remembering my grandpa and his family and his his parents, you know, and I was like, oh my God, I go there to remember them. And I was like, and that's why I changed at the end, I think.
That is really cool. When you discover something as you're writing, you can be sure that you've done some real writing. Doesn't mean it's finished writing or whatever assignment, but you've done something real. You've done what writing is supposed to inform. I noticed that first you did this really cool line of family in Jersey, and I thought, oh, uh-oh. So rhyming is a tool that poets use to show the sort of subterranean likeness of things that seem unlike. And then you rhymed family in Jersey with legacy. And so in sound, you actually compress the insight that you just had. And then something about my family, it's connected to Jersey, which usually, I don't know for you, but that's not like a very romantic destination for a lot of people. Right? So when you're rhyming your family with Jersey, it's often not a good sign. Maybe if you're Bruce Springsteen, it works differently. But then, rhyming that with legacy, that's really something. Legacy is a very different kind of word. And it was on one, it's the same word. It's got 3 syllables, family and legacy. And they're both kind of abstract. But legacy it's an elevated word, and it is a word about something that is going to pass down through generations. Legacy is something that's given to us and that we give to the next generation. That was pretty cool. Dare I say paradigmatic.
I'll share a narrative.
Okay.
I'll lay and read like the first page. Page and some, please. All right, so this is about Christmas and the ritual that happens in my family. So every Christmas Eve, the title is Christmas at the Richardsons. Every Christmas Eve, my family and I. It's laughing at me already. Okay. Every Christmas Eve, my family and I always went out to dinner and a movie. We were really poor when I was real young, so going out to eat was a real treat. As we got older, our economic situation was a little bit better, and we were old enough to work, so we were able to contribute. After dinner and a movie, we would get home, and my mother would get us all ready for bed, and we all camp out in the same room at Christmas Eve. My mother would read us "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" and a Christmas story from the Bible. And by the time she was done with the Bible version, I was so excited and full from all the food that I ate, I just would pass out. And so we'd all pass out with smiles on our faces. We loved music in our home, so the radio was always on at night, especially at Christmas time. The radio stations had the best Christmas song list, and they would play it all night long. On Christmas Day, we all woke up early, except Mom. When I say all, I mean my siblings and I. We'd wake up and look outside at the winter wonderland that Connecticut would bring us almost every year. Then we would smell the food. That was the first thing that I always noticed at Christmas, the smells. Cinnamon, turkey, greens, cornbread, black-eyed peas, and whatever my mom decided to cook. The smells made me feel so warm, happy, and safe. Fast forward, we would wake my mom up, and after being up all night preparing, she would always say, "You guys go get started. I'll be in there in a little bit." In her half-asleep, 6 a.m. in the morning, been up all night voice. She always had a sweet tone to her voice, though, no matter how hard she tried to cover it up. And then we would just run off and say, "Okay, Mommy." My oldest brother would divvy out the presents, and then finally by the time it was my mom's turn, she would come out, she would wake up and then be able to open her gifts. And I always noticed the half-eaten cookie and milk that was like half drunk. And I just thought to myself as a little kid, I never believed in Santa, because I was just like, Santa ain't coming here. And I thought, he's not coming to the projects, we don't even have a chimney, so it just didn't really connect. But I also really loved Christmas, and I would sneak in and catch my mom putting presents under the tree, because I'm just ambitious like that. And yeah, I'm skipping ahead. Even though I realized that there was no Santa, it didn't matter to me. We all played along for my youngest brother, Sean. I was just glad to be with my family. And at a very young age, I always knew and felt the deep importance of family and the joy and love that it can bring. And I just drew a little picture just to represent, just like the Christmas tree and my family and the heart. So it's like my favorite holiday, not because of all the stuff, just like the time that we spend together and the rituals that we do. That's it.
I love that picture. What is that shape?
It's like a side heart. It was like on a the way the paper was set in the notebook, you know, it was like that. But I just let it be what it was.
Yeah.
I just cut it into a heart shape.
So it's really cool to have that right after the poem, because so it's 2 pieces of writing about family that's emphasizing repetition, and that is also about time. So what does time, when you write, when we tell stories, we actually create different kinds of time. There's some kinds of time that are very cataclysmic. They're like thrillers, tons of things happening at once. There are kinds of time that are, they're just like, time seems to stand still and they stretch endlessly. What's the quality of time in this story about Christmas? How does it feel to you? Is it fast? Is it slow? Does it feel like the writer is writing about something that's lost or something that's still going on? I mean, what do you make of that?
It feels very nostalgic, very peaceful.
An endearing kind of point of view. Maybe a little bit of missing, I don't know, but just because it's set in the time period when she was a little bit younger, kind of reflecting back.
It didn't feel like there was a whole lot of emotional drama of the narrator, right? You know, maybe it's nostalgic, but it's not somebody saying, look how good I used to have it, right? Or aching for it. And you notice that it's all Christmases rolled into one, right? That we would do this. Somehow the exact same thing would happen over many years. In some of those years she was really young. In some of those years she was much older. But that she's created sentences in which all of those times and all those versions of herself are kind of having Christmas together. Which is part of what feels so kind of wonderful about it. And it's interesting how different those sentences, and some of them actually move into a young child voice, and some of them are in an older child voice. You know, the word fast forward, that's a whole other kind of language that didn't seem to happen, and there's the moment of noticing the mother and what her tone was and what it really was and what she was thinking. And so I'm thinking, okay, so that's also an adult consciousness and a complicated child consciousness, and a real feeling of love that's being expressed through the narration of that connection. And that felt totally different to me than the stuff that was socioeconomic language, right? You know, we were poor and then we had a little more money. That's like totally different language and totally different time. And somehow, it's not that you didn't have a socioeconomic circumstance during these Christmases, but when you're listing the foods that would be there and the things that would happen, somehow those circumstances seem to belong to a different kind of world. And so that was part of what I was getting from this Christmas, that this kind of Christmas time that you remember was a time that suspended the difficult circumstances and realities that really did structure your life. It's not that you forgot them or they weren't there, your parents weren't pretending, you know, because some parents put on a big show and they don't want kids to know how things are. There wasn't any of that. It's just that you as a family were able to create a kind of time that floated free of those circumstances. That was pretty cool. Do we have another colonel that would like to help? Yes.
I'm just going to read a section of the last part of the section from a poem that I wrote, which is also about Christmas.
You guys are copying from one another's lives.
You want Christmas too? Different ways to say oi. They face mir, gatenu. When we go to New York, we are more Jewish. The Yiddish accent starts to roll off my mother's tongue as the plane hits the ground. Then I know what it means to be us. Santa isn't real, I say to my Jewish mother, standing in front of the only Christmas tree we ever had. Yeah, she says. How'd you figure it out?
So, you said that that was part of the poem, right?
Yeah, it's the last section.
Felt like an ending, right? So, actually, could you read it again, but actually reverse the order of the events? I want to steal from that creative writing teacher. Because I think this
Actually
is...
start the poem with the same line.
Right now.
So it is.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
So, Yeah, she says, how'd you figure it out? Standing in front of the only Christmas tree we ever had. Santa isn't real, I say to my Jewish mother. Then I know what it means to be us. As the plane hits the ground, the Yiddish accent starts to roll off my mother's tongue. We are more Jewish when we go to New York. Gatanu, ve'esmiu, ve'e. Different ways to say oi.
Oh my
Wow.
I mean, it like definitely had a different trajectory.
Can you find the difference in trajectory? Because it did. It's like totally different.
It felt like it went from outside of your experience to deeply inside of your experience. Oh my goodness! I'm a writer, you guys, so I get off on this. and I'm a slam poet, so I'm like,
The Orthodox Jewish girls that I teach, they don't do that. That's a shame. They gotta work on that. But you know, like one of the big moments for me when I was a young writer was I wrote a lot of poems that ended in places like, yeah, how did you figure it out? They ended in this place of bitterness or brokenness, because that somehow seemed like that was the most true. If I was the most miserable, I would create the most impact. And it wasn't that I even said that to myself. It was just that's sort of the way that I saw the world. And I really did. I felt like, I was angry at my folks. And I felt like the deepest truth of my childhood was the way they failed me. And so that was where my poems were ending up. And I read about Basho, the poet who really invented haiku as an art form in 16th century Japan. And he ran a poetry workshop. That's why he supported himself, which is a total trip. And a student brought him a poem, and the student was very proud of it. And it said, a butterfly, tear its wings off, pepper tree. And, so this is great. It's got nature, and it's got a transformation, and it's got a real sense of feeling. This is a shocking image. And Basho said, no, we must not abuse God's creatures. You have to reverse the haiku. A pepper tree, put wings on it. Butterfly. And so I realized that the structures of bitterness that I was creating had this miraculous, transformative, imaginative energy in them. I didn't need to do anything different. I just needed to stop seeing the motion of my work as going from wholeness to revealing how fucked up things actually were, and allow myself to see that the opposite is also true. In fact, it's always the larger truth. Like, I was writing poems that were smaller than I was, and I wanted to write poems that were larger than I was, and I needed to reverse the haiku, and that's really what you did. And it's still not a poem about a deliriously happy childhood. It's not like you're concealing anything in it. But part of what's so fabulous is you disappeared into this language of complaint that is somehow also celebration. Like, it manages to encompass this whole range of experience. And that was in there. It was built in. So that is one of the opportunities that revision gives us. When I say, like, you can try out different shapes, you can say, what if I tell this as a happy childhood gone wrong, and now I tell it as something that's gone wrong that I now remember my way back to the happiness of my childhood. It's the same stuff. I'm just arranging it in different ways. And it's not even that there's only one way that's okay, like that was great. But that was great because it had all of the necessary material in there. If you said, Basho said, let's just have butterflies. That's not the way it works. You don't get the miraculous transformation unless you have the kind of stripped pepper tree. You need to have the wholeness of life in there, and you did. And you've done your work as a poet that way. You just needed to kind of flip it over and feel it. That was pretty wonderful. Was that a bid?
Yeah.
Sure, why not? Okay, so I had an experience with writing a poem where I started off, I wanted to figure out, sort of had a blank spot when I looked at this, paradigmatic family history, origin story, and I don't know what I am, I don't know how I don't know what to be proud of, I don't know what to hold on to, and so I started going down this journey, and it sort of turned into a poetic journey, and I stopped. It started becoming really, there's a lot of condemnation, a lot of anger, a lot of things that were coming out, and I decided that I didn't want to really end on that note. I really wanted to open it up and sort of own it and not be so bitter. And so maybe I'll just read the end. I just want to read the end of that too. So this is the end of the line. The bloodline of unconscious and confused aggression masked behind good intentions. I want to know you better, my colonial shadow. I want to know exactly who you are. Pick you out of a lineup of construct and take you away from the noise of normalization and find our way back home together. Here, a chance to clear my family name of the shame that only I can own, and claim a place of strength in this lonely space between blood, service, and the unknown.
Mm-hmm. It feels like I want is really like the liberating words in there. Because desire, you're desiring something, you don't have to say that it is, you don't even have to say it's possible. Right? That's a really affirmative way of naming really difficult stuff. So what changed, like, is the condemnation, do you see the condemnation as part of a whole, or do you feel like the condemnation is warm-up exercises to this that's whole in itself? How would you say that?
Well, it was an interesting investigation because I felt that the condemnation was part of the lineage that I was trying to convey, that was sort of the trajectory that it was on, and I decided that in recognizing it, I wanted to end a certain part of that inertia. And so to stop that, I wanted to say, all right, no more condemnation. I don't want to hate this. I don't want to reject this, but I want to accept this. And that's how I want to turn it. And it was very much about process. It was very much in the writing process. It just didn't feel right anymore.
That's really, what we want to do as writers is recognize those shifts inside ourselves. So when you start listing or you get into a jag, that's often a really fun part of writing. It's like, oh, I can do this all day, right? I can condemn my heritage or who I am. It's like rock and roll. And it can even be like, there's sort of a junk food high from it because it's like you're not part of it, right? So one of the key things in writing is to ask yourself how you're feeling. Again, it's very much like a therapeutic process, and it's odd. It's not saying, is this good? It's saying, what's happening inside me while this is going on? And when you start to feel uncomfortable, or bored, or lost, those are all important signals. And if you deal with them as, this is a problem, like I am failing as a writer, right? I shouldn't write boring things. Then you're going to miss what's actually being told to you, or you're like, there's something that's making me queasy about doing this. Like, it's happening. It's not that I'm blocked, but I'm really uncomfortable. What is that discomfort? And discomfort, well, gosh, that means that I don't want to be in this position. Well, what position am I in? And how do I want to change it? And that's really what you did. So you were using your emotional intelligence to keep thinking while you were writing. And that's really what we want to do. And sometimes we're doing it while we're writing, and sometimes that is part of the revision process. Also, you say, this just like, something goes wrong here and I don't know what it is. And you want to sort of feel your way through the poem. I would ask myself to tell myself the story of my imagination. Like, what is my imagination living through here? And like, where does that story feel like it's gone off the rails in some way? That was pretty amazing language that you came up with at the end there. And I also think it was great that you shifted a lot just by shifting rhetoric, right? So there was some condemnatory stuff in that, but it's embedded in a different kind of sentence structure. And I wonder, it was complicated, so would you mind reading it again?
Sure. Yeah, sure. This is the end of the line. The bloodline of unconscious and confused aggression masks behind good intentions. I want to know you better, my colonial shadow. I want to know exactly who you are. Pick you out of the lineup of construct, take you away from the noise of normalization, and find our way back home together. Here, a chance to clear my family name of the shame that only I can own, and claim a place of strength in this lonely space between blood, service, and the unknown.
Yeah, so you really use the shape of a sentence. So syntax is making things whole, and look how that syntax binds together these things that are really difficult to hold together. And the desire is to create a new kind of space where legacy and truth and shame and an awareness of it exist in a different kind of relationship.